Hello and welcome to my channel. Welcome to Lunchtime Live. Did you know that telling the truth and speaking the truth, especially to power, is not always easy, but it is not our job to bend the truth to the convenience of others. We must know the truth and speak the truth and do it even when it's difficult. We're going to talk about it in today's video. Let's go. Sunday. It's Sunday, 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 Sunday school. Sunday, 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 Sunday. Sunday, 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 Sunday school. Jeremiah the Suffering Preacher is our lesson title for Sunday, May 16th. My name is Waynell Henson. Many of you know me as that Sunday school girl, and a lot of you have popped on for what is now called our Lunchtime Live as we review the upcoming week Sunday school lesson. I'm so glad to see so many of you on. We do this a little bit differently than Markup Monday, so it's not all the comments from all of you as you're on, although I do see you on, Sister Jeanette, and I do see you on, Designer Grandma, Mother Brundage. You always lift my spirits, and I am so blessed to have you share your lunchtime with me. I pray that you are having a wonderful day and that you're excited about the weekend. I'm excited about the weekend, and I'm excited just about this lesson that we have today, which is, it's been so good. I've enjoyed being inside of the lesson. So I hope the same again for you, and pray that you're staying safe wherever you are. If you're new around here, allow me to say welcome. You have just joined the largest cyber community of Sunday school students on the World Wide Web. Thank you so much for being with me in this space. I still am blown away that May 1st made 6 years that I've been out here in this digital space right here on YouTube, changing the way that people see Sunday school. And it started with lesson reviews like these, but I am so excited that this channel is no longer just a lesson review, but we are an amazing community that has now crested 36,000 people who love God and love His Word, and we're growing as we study together. So listen, if you are new, make sure that you click the subscribe button so that you get connected. We currently upload at least 3 videos a week. There are now a couple of lives, and I don't want you to miss any of the content when it comes up. So if you do that and click your notifications bell, you will always know when we are on. Also, make sure you get subscribed for all TSSG mail. If you visit thatsundayschoolgirl.com, yes, and put in your email address, you'll be added to our email distribution, and you won't miss anything. And sometimes there are secret things that only go out to those who are on the email distribution. So a couple of weeks ago, there was a $10 t-shirt sale, and when people started posting with their shirts, people were messaging me saying, how did I miss the sale? And do you have shirts left? And the answer was, I didn't, because it went to the email distribution first. And within an hour, the email distribution alone was able to access all of the $10 shirts. So I don't want you to miss anything. Make sure that you are connected to this ministry. And also be sure to click that thumbs up like button. In fact, wherever you are, do that for me. That allows YouTube to know that you appreciate this content. It also helps in our rankings, but it also helps in your own algorithm. So it kind of feeds YouTube the kinds of things that you enjoy seeing. Listen, I went live last night, and I am watching my time for the lesson, but please check out last night's live. I wear a yellow bracelet now when I go to worship. And if you want to know what that means, that live tells you everything that you need to know. In short, as we are returning to Sunday school, I have shared with teachers, superintendents, pastors, Christian education leaders, a free resource that will help you think about returning to Sunday school. It will give you ideas on how to make sure that you are staying safe in your classrooms or in your sanctuaries, wherever you are. But download that resource. I need to go back into this video and add the link to the description box, and I commit to you that I will do that. But also, while you're there, you will find a new product that we have available, and Sister Angela Saavedra says that she's already ordered hers, and a lot of people did rush the site last night to get what we're calling status symbols. You have the opportunity to set culture in your church as we are returning. Many of us don't know what others are comfortable with in terms of their level of engaging and touching. I know the CDC says that those who are vaccinated can now go into public and private spaces, indoor, outdoor, with no mask, but still there is an adjustment as we come back together. So as opposed to having to ask every individual or try to feel a person out, we have made available status symbols. And you can look at someone's wrist and determine what their status is. These are pretty intuitive. Even children can understand. A red band means that the person is social distancing 100%. They do not want to be touched. They probably will be the folks who run to their cars after church. They don't even want to talk. A person like me wears yellow. That means I will talk, but you should kind of ask me first before we do too much hugging. I'll let you know in that moment, in that day, in that time, if I feel like an elbow bump or a fist bump, I will generally make the gesture, or I will let you know what I'm comfortable with. And then there are some folks who are out all the way. They are hugs and handshakes. They are ready to go. If you see a green band, you just approach that person. They don't mind at all. So again, help to set culture. And of course, because we're introducing these through TSSG, we took a shameless plug on the opposite side to say, I love Sunday school. So all of the bands on their opposite side do say, I love Sunday school. My church school friends, if you need a church school version, inbox me and let me kind of see what the interest is, and we will figure out how to make that happen. Let's go ahead and get into our lesson for this week, which again is Jeremiah, the suffering preacher. Our Bible basis is Jeremiah chapter 38, verses 14 through 23. The Bible truth. Jeremiah continues to proclaim the Lord's prophecies. Our memory verse is verse 15, and the lesson aim is that we will agree with Jeremiah's hesitation to give controversial advice to Zedekiah, sense Jeremiah's apprehension when talking to Zedekiah, and commit to giving challenging, godly advice. We are almost done in our series on prophets, and this lesson, I think I've told you all before how much I love Old Testament. I love the stories, and I love just the digging in history. But let's go ahead and read chapter 38, verses 14 through 23, and then we'll talk about the lesson in review. Then Zedekiah the king, I'm going to read the NLT, I'm switching. One day Zedekiah sent for Jeremiah and had him brought to the third entrance of the Lord's temple. I want to ask you something, the king said, and don't try to hide the truth. Jeremiah said, if I tell you the truth, you will kill me. And if I give you advice, you won't listen to me anyway. So King Zedekiah secretly promised him, as surely as the Lord, our creator, lives, I will not kill you or hand you over to the men who want you dead. Then Jeremiah said to Zedekiah, this is what the Lord God of heaven's armies, the God of Israel, says. If you surrender to the Babylonian officers, you and your family will live, and the city will not be burned down. But if you refuse to surrender, you will not escape. This city will be handed over to the Babylonians, and they will burn it to the ground. But I am afraid to surrender, the king said, for the Babylonians may hand me over to the Judeans who have defected to them. And who knows what they will do to me? Jeremiah replied, you won't be handed over to him if you choose to obey the Lord. Your life will be spared, and all will go well for you. But if you refuse to surrender, this is what the Lord has revealed to me. All of the women left in your palace will be brought out and given to the officers of the Babylonian army. The women will taunt you, saying, what fine friends you have. They have betrayed and misled you. When your feet sank in the mud, they left you to your fate. All your wives and children will be led out to the Babylonians, and you will not escape. You will be seized by the king of Babylon, and this city will be burned down. That is our reading for this week. As we look at very quickly background on the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah is the author according to tradition. The date is approximately 629 BC. And by the way, the TSSG notes link is in the description box for this video. And I invite you to grab my notes. I think I have 8 pages of notes, and no way am I going to share it all in this lesson review, but there's a lot of content in here. As we've looked at the Old Testament and prophets in particular, what we have learned is that God has always interacted with his people. He's always sought to have that connection and relationship and activity with his people. And whenever they got off track, and you can go back and look at this point, we've talked about the division of the children of Israel, the northern and the southern kings, but whenever they've gotten off track, God has used the voice of his prophets to get his word to them. He loved them so much. It was never God's intent to simply punish people. We don't serve a God who only wants to punish, but he will do what is necessary to get the focus back on him. And so Jeremiah was a messenger, the mouthpiece of God. He spoke. This unit is about courageous prophets, and he's one who spoke with courage and with boldness. And he did it even when it was not popular. Now, as we look at chapter 38, our printed text starts at verse 14, but this has been a very exciting chapter. I'll put it that way. Let's talk about sort of the cast of characters, and we see them in verse 14, but let's get some insight into who they were and what's going on. So Jerusalem is under attack. We're dealing with the southern kingdom, and they're actually not just under attack, they're under siege, which means the city has been surrounded by their enemy. And at this point, you would think that they would surrender, because part of the surrounding them was to keep them so that they couldn't even get out to get any other rations, or whatever they had in the city was what was left. And after that, they would have to exit and be overtaken to get anything else in. So here they are surrounded. And at the same time, their king is trying to hold out. I think he's trying to hold out, trying to see if those folks will just leave. Maybe if we don't come out, if we don't do anything, they will leave. But the bottom line is that things are extremely chaotic in Judah. That's important to know. In our setting, we're dealing with a very chaotic time. Now, let's look at our cast of characters, and we see two people in verse 14. There is Zedekiah. He is the king. His given name is Mattaniah. He's the king of Judah. His name was actually changed by Nebuchadnezzar II to Zedekiah when he was put on the throne to replace, I believe it was his nephew that he replaced. And his name means that God is righteous, or God's righteousness. But he's an evil king, and he does not live up to his name. But we do see the rightness or the righteousness of God played out even through his life. And we'll see that because God is faithful to his word. He's faithful to his promise. So Zedekiah, though, is also, let's talk about his temperament. He's a cowardly king. He's one who agrees with almost anybody. He is, he works out of fear. He moves oftentimes out of the fear of what's going around. So even as he's talking to Jeremiah, you're going to see that he is, even in that moment, even as he's speaking and he's hearing what God is going to say, he's operating completely out of fear. He's always done that. And not only is he given to fear, but he's given to peer pressure. So whoever is around, whatever voices are around, he will listen. He may come back and change that decision later on, quite frankly, when somebody else says something, but he tends to operate out of peer pressure. It is so interesting because at one point, he is actually Team Babylonian. He is all for the Babylonians. Remember, it's Nebuchadnezzar who puts him into power. But at this point, he has now decided that he wants to find ways to break free of essentially the tyranny of the Babylonians. So he's very volatile in his actions. And because he wants to figure out what to do and how to move, he is calling for Jeremiah. So interesting, right? An evil king, one who does not follow God, one who follows idol gods, one who is given to the opinions of everyone else, actually calls for a prophet of God to hear what God will say. Now let's talk about that prophet. It is Jeremiah. His name means the Lord has appointed. And Jeremiah prophesied or preached for a long time. He preached and prophesied for 40 years. And yet in that time, while he did what God required of him, he was not a celebrated or an embraced preacher. People were not like, yeah, Jeremiah's coming to town. Let's go. Let's put out a 3-night revival flyer for him. Absolutely not. Why? Because his words were often problematic for people to hear. He did not bend the word of the Lord for the comfort of others. Whatever message God gave, that's just how Jeremiah gave it. And so oftentimes that wasn't a message that people received with warm and fuzzies. Jeremiah was not your God is going to give you a house prophet. He was not there to prophesy God was going to give you your dream car. He was there to speak the truth of God. And ultimately that became his crime. If you read verses 1 through 13, the crime that he was accused of essentially was the truth. Even though they saw him as one who threatened the safety of the country or the safety of the land in terms of speaking against the military's ability to be successful, he was only saying what God said to him. And Jeremiah essentially prophesied the defeat of the city. He, in fact, tells them, surrender. Like, this fight is not worth it. You can't win. When I said that, it reminded me of The Wiz. Remember, you can't win, child. You can't. And that's what he's trying to say. Like the Scarecrow said, you can't win. And so he's telling them, give up, surrender, and live. Look in verse 2, you'll see that. He's telling them that the Babylonians are going to take this city. That's in verse 3. But here was the big issue. In verse 4, his words have essentially hurt the military efforts of Judah. Why? Because hearing his words would likely mean that the military wouldn't even attempt to fight hard because he's already said, you're going to lose. And so what does that do? It makes officials very angry. And there are 4 men who unify and go to the king against Jeremiah. And they're saying, hey, he's causing harm to us. We got to get rid of him. And so the king agrees. Remember, I told you he's moved by the opinions of others. He agrees to having Jeremiah, let's get rid of him. Let's get rid of the truth. And so they throw him into, the Bible says, a cistern, which is a pit of mud. It is so interesting that when people cannot handle the truth, watch the agendas that come after truth to try to get rid of it. We're dealing with that even now. The agendas in the land that seek to destroy truth. Interesting as well as you look in the Bible that with Jesus, when they could not do anything else, when they couldn't deal with the truth in him, to get rid of him meant to send him to the cross. Here's Jeremiah. Getting rid of him meant putting him into a cistern where there was no escape. And if water would come from the rain, he would possibly drown, putting him there with no food or water. But as it would happen, and this is not our lesson, but God does send help. He is rescued from that ugly pit. And God's plan is not thwarted in any way. God uses an unexpected person as a part of his plan, because God's plan, even when people want to get rid of truth, you cannot squash the truth, the plan of God. And so that brings us to verse 14, where Zedekiah the king has now sent again for Jeremiah. And he brings him essentially into what is a secret meeting. Now note, this is the last meeting that happens between these two. It's not the first meeting. We need to keep that in mind. This is not the first meeting, but this will be the last. In fact, there was a time look in chapter 37, verses 17 through 21. That was one of the other meetings. That was the time preceding this one, but this will be it. Let's also look at the fact that you have a man, a prophet, who is dealing with leadership. And we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, speaking truth to power. We talked about what it means to have to stand up when you know that it can mean danger or difficulty. And so meetings, but with people of power, let me slow down. Meetings with people of power can mean different outcomes. That happens very practically with us. In fact, they will tell you in corporate spaces, most big decisions, I won't say most, many big decisions are not even the conversations that take place in the meetings or in boardrooms. There are decisions that take place in other spaces. That's why you look at the golf course, right? There are a lot of people, and I was never really good at this in my corporate assignments, but happy hour. I didn't enjoy happy hour, but I needed to know that my choice not to be there often meant that I was not privy to certain conversations that took place, because those meetings that take place in different spaces can be interesting and they can bring different outcomes. And in this space, here is Zedekiah meeting with Jeremiah in the Lord's house, in the temple, which eventually will be destroyed by the Babylonians. They are in the third entry. Why is that important? Because it is a private area where they would not be discovered. A private conversation in a private area. The king never meant for anybody else to know that this took place. He wants to ask Jeremiah. So interesting that a king who is an evil king calls for a godly man for advice. I know many of us may deal with people who do not profess Christ as Savior, and it happens even sometimes in our workplace. They may not confess Christ as Savior, but when they need a prayer request, they'll likely come to you and say, would you pray? Or I know that you pray. And here's Jeremiah. And the king knows, he realizes that a lot of people will say a lot of things to him, but Jeremiah is the one person who will tell him the truth. We all need that someone who will tell us the truth. And here's the thing about the truth. The king wants a conversation, even though he knows that he is not willing to do what God says. He's not even open to truth, but here he is inquiring for truth. The Bible tells us that you're going to know truth, and the truth will make you free. And so the wicked king asks for a word. And he says, don't hold anything back. Don't hide anything from me. He understands, he's acknowledging that Jeremiah is a prophet, and he knows this, that Jeremiah is not going to be willing to bend or to twist the truth for his comfort. It's almost like the king is saying, I can take it. Tell me what it is. But Jeremiah realizes, you can't handle the truth. I'm speaking truth to power, but you cannot handle the truth. He's standing there thinking, and in fact, he says this, if I tell you the truth, there are really two things here. He knows that there is danger because truth is what's gotten him in trouble before. Truth was what got him thrown into the cistern. Truth is what got him stuck in the mud. And so his response is, he realizes that the king is not, yes, Sister Bridget, he just wants options. But the king is not spiritual. He is not rational. And I told you before, that's why I pointed out that when you are led by fear, fear will wipe out reason. Fear will wipe out your ability to even hear or see with a spiritual eye. And so Jeremiah says this, two things. Number one, I'm concerned about my life. This didn't work out really well for me before. And I already know that what I have to say, because I really don't intend to change the message. I don't have anything new to tell you. So I know that it's going to get me into the same space it did before. It's didn't end well. But secondly, and we saw this a couple of weeks ago, no matter what I say, you're going to do what you want to do anyway. So again, his implication is the word is unchanged. You need to surrender. But if you don't surrender, I already know you're not going to want to hear that. You don't want to surrender. So the king, who is trying to pull this information out of Jeremiah, Sister Angela says he wants to hear what the word is to see if it's something he wants to follow. But if it's bad, he doesn't want to listen. And I think sometimes people ask questions to know if we're going to change our minds. But if God said it, it does not change. Remember that a prophet speaks what God says, and it happens just like they said. So he couldn't change the word. In fact, the king is pulling on him so that he makes a promise. The king hears Jeremiah's concerns. His concern is his life. His concern is that you're going to do what you want to do anyway. And he makes a promise, as the young people say, he makes a promise on God. And he says that number one, let's talk about the life piece. I'm not going to kill you, and I won't allow those who want you dead. I'm not going to put you in their hands either. I'm not going to allow them to kill you. But the second thing that he was concerned about, remember, Jeremiah says, it is my life, and you're not going to listen to me anyway. Well, the king makes the promise on life, but he says nothing at all concerning his willingness to listen to advice. He makes no commitment at all. Jeremiah responds. He opens up. And again, he doesn't change what God has said. This is the word from God. It is the word. They're not my words, but it is from the Lord who has his army in heaven. That's what a host means. And it is from the Lord who is the God of Israel. And that is to say, God himself. I know that you think you're the king, but God is the king of all. And he's letting him know that the all-powerful God has a message. And if you look at the text, he's telling him, this is a message for you, king. The Lord has a message. We talked last week about warning signs and how God will send signs before there is destruction. And here are the warning signs. It is a condition. You have choices here, king. God is giving you a choice. If you will do one thing, there is an outcome. But if you choose the other way, you got two options. Got option A, option B, door one, door two. If you choose door number one, you're going to live. If you choose door number 2, it will mean death and destruction. If door number 1, you surrender to the Babylonians, that means go ahead, as they used to say, go ahead and take this spanking, go ahead and take this punishment, go ahead and accept this military attack, then you and your family are going to live. Not only was his family at stake, but those that he led. The city would also be spared in terms of it being burned down. Yeah, I didn't say that they weren't going to attack the city. Yeah, they're going to come in here. Yeah, it's going to be an attack. But at least that whole burning down everything, that part we can avoid that. But if you will not, Babylon is going to take the city. He's going to take your family and everything you see around, everything that you've worked hard for, everything that represents all that you are will be burned down. The king responds, and I continue to tell you that he was a fearful man. He makes his own confession of fear. He really doesn't want to surrender. Now, there's likely a little ego in play here too, but his concern is personal danger. He doesn't say, I'm afraid of the Babylonians. This is so interesting to me. He says, I'm afraid of the people that have already defected to the Babylonian side. I'm afraid of those. We're dealing with a coward. Jeremiah says, don't worry about them. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about the people. What you need to do is take your eyes off people and focus on obeying God. You can go ahead and put that in the comments because that wasn't even in my notes. But we've got to learn to take our eyes off of people and worrying about what could happen and what they will say and what they will do and things in our mind that can happen, and just focus on obeying God. And so the words of the prophet are to obey, to surrender and live. And I love this. He says, if you choose to obey, that's another nugget for this week. Obedience is a choice. Obedience, our obedience to God is a choice, but his safety, his very life was contingent on obedience. Our lives today, our ability to live successfully in God, it is contingent upon our obedience. Obey. Yes, it will mean surrendering, but giving up something means living. And we know that today, that giving up means living in Christ. It means we surrender, but we live. But if you refuse, if you choose not to obey, remember, God will give you what it is you think you want. If you choose to obey, Deuteronomy 28, love God, love him, do what he says. He wants to bless you. He wants to help you live. But don't do what he says do. Do it your own way. Do it the way that you think is best. And he is going to give you what it is you think you want. And in this case, it would mean death. In verses 22 and 23, this is the end of our printed text. Not only does it mean that they would be overtaken, the city would be burned down, but I looked at this. The king's disobedience would mean consequences, not just for him, but it meant something about his family, and it was detrimental to those that he led. We must remember that when we disobey, we are not always the only ones who feel the effects of that. There are families today that are in cycles because of individuals' disobedience. There are people, there are organizations, there are congregations, there are governments who are in trouble because of disobedience, our own included. There is an obedience that God requires. His judgment is sure, but it was dependent upon the extent to which the king would obey. So he says, if you don't obey, if you can't let go, what causes us not to obey? Control issues. The king was concerned about control. If I give up my control, my perceived control, if I give up, I have the fear of what comes along with that. The thing that he feared most is actually the thing that he would get as a result of disobedience and rejection. To disobey the words of the prophet essentially is to disobey God. Yes, Sister Bridget, it is the domino effect. And he says, it's going to be, and I wrote it this way, it is a public display when you disobey. If you choose not to obey, not only will you die, but the women, those that you should care for, the weaker vessel, those women will be taken and they'll be given to the officers of the Babylonians. And even though the text doesn't say this expressly, we pretty much know what that means. That means that the women, and I'm getting ahead of myself, first of all, the women would be taken, given to their officers, and he was concerned about being mocked. He's saying, they're going to mock you, all right. It's not whether you surrender to get mocked. It is if you die, they're going to mock you and say, some kind of friends you have. What happened to your friends who were supposed to be with you? And when you needed them the most, they left you in the mud. And how ironic. You left Jeremiah in the mud and your friends left you in the mud. And he talks about his family being harmed. And here are those women I wanted to talk about, the wives and the children, those that he would have needed to care for and to protect. He says, no, they're going to be given over. And again, we don't know the details, but it likely meant that those women would be raped, that they would be in forced marriages or even killed. What he's trying to tell the king is, you can't win, child. You cannot escape. Babylon is going to overtake this city. But what do you want? Do you want to have them overtake and win? Or do you want to have them overtake and kill you and everything in it? Verse 23 tells us that if you make a bad decision, king, it's going to be your fault. There's an ownership that comes with making bad decisions. And Jeremiah lets him know that you are going to be held accountable. It will be your fault. Jeremiah's word was to surrender. As you look at the lesson, what he's telling the king is, all you have to do is this. And for so many of us, there have been things that we have been required to do, and it's all you have to do is this. But sometimes saying all you have to do is seems like the most difficult thing in the world, because they are things that for whatever reason we have felt attached to. All you have to do is fill in the blank. But then there's a consideration for what it is we feel like we are giving up. The king felt like he was giving up his dignity, felt like he was giving up his power. And that seemed like a courageous move, but it took more courage to obey God. Spoiler alert, we don't get here in this lesson, but the king chose door number 2. And we know from chapter 39 that it happened just like God said it would. And the king does lose his life. The king kept his promise, but he did not heed the advice. He did not have Jeremiah killed, but he did not heed his advice. And it ultimately cost him his life. It's time for me to wrap up because it's just lunchtime. But here are my key learnings from this week. And go ahead and begin to drop your key learnings into the chat box since you're here. Don't forget to click the thumbs up like button. I've given you lots of ahas, so I'll just share a couple of key learnings and then you can grab the rest in the notes. Winfield Thomas has a great key learning. Pride destroys. Absolutely. And I think I'm aligned with you on this one, Brother Thomas, where I said, don't be so set with your heels dug into a position that you are not able to hear the truth. Don't dig your heels so far in that you cannot be moved. Sister Patrice says, surrender, let go of your control. And I wrote it this way: we must know when to fight and when to surrender, Sister Patrice. The final one I'll share is that when we're challenged to speak truth, we must do so with courage and without compromise. And like a Jeremiah, do it no matter what the cost. I've enjoyed having lunch with you all today. Thank you so much for being present. Thank you so much for being a part of this amazing community. I am praying for you as you enjoy your classes this week. Don't forget, I am going to, as soon as I'm done here, I will go in and drop the link for you to check out your status symbols. The first shipment is going out. They're going out today and tomorrow, but the bulk shipment I have, I'm going to let you know they're going very quickly, but we're shipping out as soon as I get orders in. So I want you to be safe and have an amazing weekend. I love y'all so much. I will see you in Sunday school. Goodbye, everybody.
Sunday, 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 Sunday. Sunday, 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 Sunday.
This bag makes a great gift for teachers, and of course there's a church school version as well. Visit my Etsy store for this and other great items, and look down below this video for t-shirts for all ages and sizes.
Sunday, 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 Sunday. Hey, Sunday, 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 Sunday school. La da da, la da 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 da, la da da, la da 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 da, la da da, la da 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 da. La da da, la da 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 da. Changing the way you see Sunday school with that Sunday.